So the two components really go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other if you want to animate and have stuff move around. All of these small tiny boxes down here are frames. And because we set our document to 24 frames per second, essentially for 1 second of animation, you'll have 24 of these little boxes, or 24 frames. You can see here where it tells you 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. If you want to, you can also scale up this area by using the slider over here. Makes the frames bigger for you to see or not. I tend to use it just in the default view because I'm used to it, but by all means, scale it up if you need to, that's fine. Now, another way to think of the stage area is to also, I mentioned that you could think of it as a screen or as the camera view that's capturing the action of the animation. But another way to think of it is as a sheet of paper. So basically, there's two ways to animate. Let's say you have a drawing on frame 1. If you go along the timeline to this frame and right-click, you'll see you've got all these options. So you can choose just insert frame, and what that does is basically hold the drawing that's on the first frame for the entire duration. So there's no animation because there hasn't been any new drawing. It's just one drawing that's being held for this amount of time. So it's still a drawing on one piece of paper, if you like. So if you right-click and then choose Insert Keyframe, that's now created 2 drawings. So you can think of it as a second sheet of paper with a second drawing on it. Doesn't look like you've got 2 drawings because essentially it's the exact same one. This frame is the same as the other one, but I'll show you that it's 2 separate drawings if I just select it and holding down Shift and my right arrow key to move it. And if I move back and forth, you can see now that these are 2 different drawings. So I've got 1 second of animation with 2 keyframes, but there's actually no animation because there's no change in anything that I've drawn. So I'm going to come back along here to the middle, and in this one I can right click again, and this time I'll choose to insert a blank keyframe. Now what I've done here is I've given myself a completely clean stage, or you could think of it as a completely clean sheet of paper. Generally, to make an animation, you would have to draw the same stick figure here in a new pose. And so in Animate, what you can do is come up here, and there's a small icon here called onion skinning. Turn that on, and now that shows you a ghosted or faint image of the first drawing. You can also drag these brackets out, and it'll show you a ghosted or faint image of the subsequent drawing, or the next frame. As I said, because my first and last drawing are the same, you don't see any difference. But now what you can do is simply trace that first drawing and then make whatever changes you wanted to that pose in this frame. So let's just say he's waving, his arm is going to be slightly different, everything else is going to stay the same. Now that's going to read as your basic animation because you've got 3 different frames and you've got 3 different drawings, and as you can see, there is some movement. Another way to do the exact same thing is to simply, instead of inserting a blank keyframe, at this point you could also right-click and insert keyframe, which again, as I've explained, just duplicates that previous drawing, and now you can just make changes to this one. So it just saves you having to redraw the full figure if you just wanted to change his arm. Okay, so the other important thing to know about the timeline is that you can work with the timeline in layers, very similar to Photoshop or any of those other drawing programs. You can use as many layers as you want. You can even group layers into folders. And this all becomes very handy when you need to add things like guides, which I'm going to show you how to do later on. I mean, you could even have a background on one layer and your animation on top. Okay, so that's the basics of the timeline and keyframes.